Okay, man, we are live right now. All right. Did you get your car issues taken care of?
Sorry, what?
Did you get all your car issues taken care of?
Yeah, they like towed my car away, just like some random tow yard because I didn't get to it in time. I guess the police got to my car before I found out about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm just gonna get a rental car now, and I mean, they said they probably aren't gonna be able to find out who did it, just because usually with like hit and run incidents, it's I mean you don't really without any like witnesses or anything. It's just like trying to find a car that maybe like has similar like front end damage to the damage that occurred to my car.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, they probably won't find anyone, which sucks. But
Yeah.
but I mean,
Karma.
insurance is going to cover like a rental car and stuff like that. So it could be worse, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I was saying karma will come back, and for people hit and run, I mean they'll get theirs.
Yeah, hopefully. The shitty thing is, I just had another car. So this car was like my parents were loaning to me.
Yeah.
But my car, I had an Outback, Subaru Outback, and on the 4th of July, I was driving down the interstate. One of my tires popped, and when it popped, I like swerved left really hard. It was like my back left tire, and like I guess the air all rushing out at once caused my car to swerve left. And I like slammed into the Jersey wall, and that car got totaled. So like in the span of like 2 months, I've had 2 cars totaled that were like not from like an accident, just from like weird events.
Dude, that sucks. Well,
yeah, it really sucks.
I hope your luck changes for you for that.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks, I appreciate it.
So all right, man. Well, let's get into a little bit. So I mean, you're a web developer here in Richmond.
Yeah.
The first thing I want to know is, I mean, what inspires you to even get started developing?
Well, I kind of began, like my whole life, I was really big into graphic design. Like, as a kid in like elementary school and middle school, like I remember one year for Christmas, I'd asked for like Photoshop for Christmas, like back when you still like bought the CDs.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'd always really been big into design. And I like, potentially kind of, wanted to do that as like a career. I think as I got into like high school, I kind of got involved in other stuff. And so I didn't do as much design. I enjoyed writing a lot. And so just by like happen chance, when I went to college, I decided I wanted to do an English degree and then maybe get into like journalism or something like that. Okay. Wasn't really sure, but I had always still kind of like, I still had like a copy of Photoshop on my laptop and stuff. Like I was still kind of messing around with it here and there.
Just dabbling.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of had that, kind of in the background, and I had like a kind of a core skill area in that regard. And then probably, I think it was my junior year, one of my classes for my major was called Developing Online Content. And since it was kind of weird, it was in the English department, but the class ended up being basically a like beginner web design class.
Okay.
And I got into it, and instantly I was like hooked. I was like, this is like so much fun. I was spending like hours, just like tweaking like the little projects we were working on, just like, a bare bones personal site. And I was like having so much fun just messing around with it. Okay. And so, from there, at that point, it wasn't really like something I was going to do for a career. I was just kind of enjoying it. And then I think around my kind of, I guess, as the class went on and I found myself enjoying it more, I started using websites like, I think I first started on Code Academy and just started like like some basic, like the HTML classes, which was kind of like the stuff I'd already learned in my class at school. And then I remember I took my first JavaScript class on Code Academy. Okay. And I was kind of like, really confused. I didn't really have any like computer science background. But I was still really interested. I was like, I didn't understand really what I was doing at the time, but I wanted to learn more. It wasn't like I was like, just like, screw this, it makes no sense. I wanted to find out like how this could be applied. I applied for a bunch of internships that summer in a lot of different areas. And I just thought, hey, what the heck, I'll apply for like some basic web design internships and just see. I ended up getting an internship with a small advertising shop in downtown Richmond called Rocket Pop Media. Okay. They're on the corner of Main and Robinson. And and so they got back to me and said, hey, we're always open to internships, come by and we can talk. So basically I went by the shop. They were, totally open for an internship. And so kind of from there is where it all, I would say, began, in a more serious manner. And at their shop, they were building websites with WordPress, but they were building like actual themes. So it was a lot of front-end development, and then quite a bit of PHP, and not really actively like working in SQL, but all WordPress websites use MySQL databases. So there was a little bit of like SQL that I learned, and kind of like just general like database 101, I guess, that I learned, and a little bit about MySQL.
The basic queries and things like that you need to know.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, I wasn't, the amount of SQL that I was writing was, next to nothing, but I still knew enough to, write like a basic query to the database, stuff like that. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. And then
so kind of organic, kind of, you kind of stumbled upon development. Really.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't in my family. I didn't know anyone. I had a couple friends that were like CS majors at school, but like I didn't really know what they were doing, and I never like had anyone tell me I would be good at computer science or anything like that. But I think the reason I really fell in love with it was because of my design background. It was almost similar in that way, except that instead of using a program like Photoshop, for example, where you click on a tool and mess with it, or clicking on a filter or stuff like that, instead you were writing code. And I think something just about writing the code just really clicked with me. I've always like really enjoyed like learning languages, so it was almost like understanding the syntax of different languages. Like once I got into more advanced stuff, that was really appealing to me. And I think just in general, just the feeling of writing something on a file and then opening it up in a browser and seeing something come to life that's interactive and other people can see and interact with and use. It was just like a really, really cool thing to me, to kind of see that transformation of text to a full-fledged interactive application. And so that was kind of how I got into it. Like you said, it was very kind of just kind of stuff happened, kind of do a little in a class, and ended up really enjoying it. And I've been hooked and doing it ever since. I finished my degree up about a year ago, and I've been working in the development field ever since.
That's awesome, man. So it's really kind of cool. You've been able to, like I said, you stumbled upon it, and then you're able to find, coming from your, I guess, design background, another kind of creative outlet to express yourself,
Mm-hmm.
And being able to, like you're saying, put code to the browser, and people being able to enjoy and actually use what you've created. It's an awesome experience. I love it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think, like you said, you know, coming from the design background, not really, you know, being like a heavy like CS person, I think kind of, you know, really helped intrigue the whole experience to me and like let me really enjoy it rather than get, you know, bogged down on like the code itself. Rather, you know, it's been more about the transformation of the code to what the output is that's really kind of hooked me and left me, you know, loving it ever since.
No, that's awesome, man. Are you using any you know, any kind of new tool or technology you're using lately at all, or anything fun you've been experimenting with?
I guess I wouldn't say it's not brand spanking new, but I at my old job, I kind of at first I began using Grunt, and then I began moving on to Gulp, which is something that I've really liked. Which is I would say it's pretty new. I mean, it's only been around for about a year or two.
Right.
And Gulp is really awesome. It was really good for me when I was working at my old position. When I would build a WordPress theme, it's basically a bunch of templates that just have a little bit of PHP in them, but they're mostly just kind of basic, you know, HTML templates. And then I would write my CSS and Sass, and then have my JavaScript files. And so having all of that, and having like multiple templates, it was a lot to handle. I had heard about Grunt at first for a while, and I didn't really know. I think at that time I wasn't, you know, at the level where I really understood its usefulness. And once I kind of started using Grunt to kind of manage my workflow, I then ended up finally moving on to Gulp, which I think has kind of, at least in my eyes, become more of an industry standard at this point. I mean, I think Grunt and Gulp kind of still share, but at least from what I've seen, more people have begun moving on to Gulp. But it's really awesome. The way I was using it, basically, you would set up a Gulp file, and you would just run Gulp through the command line, and what it would do would be in you know, one command from the terminal, I could have all of my Sass compiled. Then I could have my Sass, you know, say I have a bunch of different Sass partials. I could have those all combined into one Sass file, and have that all concatenated and then minified, you know, all in one command. Same with JavaScript. I could have multiple JavaScript files all concatenated into one file, and then have that file, you know, get like run through Uglify and have it all minified. It can also minify all your HTML. I could, you know, download additional plugins, and, you know, I was doing a little experimenting and was using like an image minification Gulp task that would basically, when I would run Gulp, it would go to my image file, run through each of my images, and minify my images too, which it was a big thing for me, because in a lot of our themes we were using tons of images. They were taking up you know, a lot of bandwidth, and some of our users were experiencing you know, longer wait times when they got to the site, and load times. And so having that just a part of my workflow, you know, it almost becomes, you know, you don't even think about it because you've already dealt with, you know, putting that into your Gulp workflow from the get-go. And so Gulp has definitely been something that I've been using probably for the past, I would say, I don't know, 4 months maybe. And I just started a new job recently, and they are also using Gulp. And I haven't been there long enough to see how they're using it, but I know, you know, there's a lot of uses even just outside of just simple, you know, concatenating files and minifying them and stuff like that. So it's a really awesome tool. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's, you know, working with a lot of files at once. It becomes, you know, really a godsend for you know, basically just running a lot of web development tasks all at the same time. It's really awesome. And then I would say a second thing that I've kind of been experimenting with just a tiny bit, but really haven't had a ton of time to work with, is probably web components.
Okay.
And So web components are basically, they've, kind of some developers like Google have been kind of on this team working on web components over the past few years, and they really haven't seen a lot of widespread adoption yet. But a lot of those guys are kind of saying that they believe this is, more or less the future of the web. And I've done a little research myself, and just kind of wanting to play with them, just like when I'm bored or sitting at home or something. And so I've been kind of, I guess, just like really all I've done is fork the Polymer project off of GitHub, which is Google's their web component library right now. And web components, I think, are really awesome because what they are just encapsulated, basically custom HTML elements that have all of their functionality for having that component look the way it should, function the way it should, and interact the way it should, is entirely encapsulated in that element. So if I want to, for instance, use some sort of, let's say I wanted some sort of form on my website that incorporated, like Ajax and making like a asynchronous request somewhere, or say just any sort of component that uses some sort of JavaScript framework that maybe I don't want to include globally. I only want it for that particular use. A web component would be a really great idea in that regard, because if I use a web component that only in that position on my website is that whatever that framework that I'm needing to use it's not included globally. It incorporates web components, incorporate this really awesome thing called Shadow DOM, which is basically your element has its own DOM per se that is totally totally separate from like the global page DOM. And so using something like that, I think, and making just the idea of kind of like modularizing your interface so that you don't have to worry about having like 20 different dependencies all because just because you want to like use a tiny feature is just a really nice idea. And I think from a developer standpoint of having to manage so many different files working off of one another, and having to load multiple scripts just because you want like one little piece of interactivity on your website. It just seems like a really cool idea to me, and something that could be really useful in the future.
I can definitely see that happening. I mean, it's a it's like it kind of goes along with this maintainability in general too. You're saying,
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's a web component. Yeah, that sounds. Actually, I haven't looked much into it myself, but just from what you're saying right there, that sounds pretty freaking awesome, actually.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's like I said, it hasn't been used a lot, but if you go and look up Google's Polymer project, they've already built out a lot of web components right now and kind of illustrated the idea behind it. I'm not sure what like the browser compatibility is for using web components right now, but I know at least on Chrome you can use them and don't have to worry about a lot of stuff breaking. But like I said,
sorry not to cut you off, but you're basically just, for people that are listening to, maybe this is something that they might not want to put into production right now, but at least maybe just to test it out and kind of see what's going on with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just important to, keep an eye out on those things. And, to me, I think I was just kind of interested in the idea. I'd heard a few people, over the internet and stuff like that talk about web components, and, just kind of figured, hey, why don't I, check into this, just see what it's all about. And so I learned a little bit about it. It seemed like an interesting idea to me. And, maybe, we may be seeing in the future sites being built purely out of web components, or, it may be like an idea where people are like, hey, this seems kind of cool, but it's ended up being much more of a hassle. I think at this point it's probably way too early to tell, but like I said, a lot of people over at Google are pretty stoked about it. So I think it's definitely something people should keep an eye out for. It's a cool idea, and definitely some fun to just kind of mess around with.
That's great, man. Too. It's that's the best thing about development. It's like anything that can just make our jobs easier it's exciting. It's always worth looking into, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, again, getting in just coding in general. I mean, it kind of seems like it's the thing to do now. Whether or not you see more and more people, especially our age, for the younger, the 20s, getting more into it. Actually, last year, the old house leader, Eric Cantor, basically made a statement saying becoming literate in code is as essential to being literate in any language and math. Do you agree with that at all? Do you think everyone should learn how to code? I mean, have you heard people talking about that before?
Yeah. I've definitely heard people talking about that, and how, being literate in code is kind of like, the thing that a lot of, I guess, people high up in, like you just said, Eric Cantor, people high up in politics, people high up in math and sciences are saying, and it makes sense, because, here we are, a society that is consuming technology at an incredible rate. I mean, whether you're on an app or a website, or even, just watching TV, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that, almost behind every single thing that they're interacting with these days, there was a programmer, or more likely, a lot of programmers that have built, that piece of technology for you to use. And, I think, on one hand, I want to say that absolutely, yes, you should be literate in some sort of code. You don't have to be, it's not to say everyone should be a coder, because, I don't think that's true. But
like a guru.
I think, yeah. I don't think that everyone needs to code, but I think, in terms of just like how, in high school you're required to take, whatever 2 years of a foreign language. I definitely think that people should be at least taking some sort of class that, maybe it's not like a hardcore CS class, but I think there should be some sort of class that at least gives you a general idea of the basics of some sort of language, whether, probably a more user-friendly language would be, just like some HTML and CSS, but even, learning, a little bit of more of an actual programming language, JavaScript, or even, a more kind of statically typed language like Java or Python, and allow them to understand, basic like control flow, like if-else statements, understanding functions and stuff like that, because I think, once you wrap your head around just the basics of really any programming language and understand some of those constructs, I think you start to really understand more how technology works. I know plenty of people who, will get on some app and they're like, oh my God, this is like the coolest thing ever. Like, how in the world could they have built that? And, but if you have a programming background, you're thinking in your head, well, of course it's really hard to build, but you can at least understand or have an idea of how they kind of built it. And right. I think that gives you a much greater appreciation for the technology you use, back before I really learned how to program it all. I would kind of use a computer and I really wouldn't think, twice about it. But I think now that I've, kind of been in the web development field for a few years now and kind of just, learn more about programming in general, I have so much more respect for using a computer and understanding, just the programming power that was needed just to build the operating system. Right. It's really insane that, you're on a computer and it's managing, all these things at once. You're, it's running a browser for you. It's running a music playing application in the background. You know, I think just in general, I think for a society like ours that's such huge technology consumers, I think, you know, having people at least have just somewhat of an idea of the technology that went into building these products that they use, I think it'll just give us a much greater appreciation for, you know, these tools that we use, and, you know, hopefully inspire people to, you know, want to do more in those fields, or, you know, at the very least, just, you know, support technology endeavors, and just support kind of the technology field in general. You know, there's definitely, you know, there's certainly some uses where, you know, technology has grown and affected us in negative ways, but I think in general, at least from my perspective, kind of the advent of all this technology over the past, you know, I would say kind of 20 or 30 years, you know, ever since kind of like the internet started coming up, and you know, we've got all these phones and TVs and computers. I think it's really ended up transforming the world in mostly a positive way. And I think, you know, having people kind of understand the backbone behind it will give them, like I said, a much greater appreciation just for what they use and for the field in general. So yeah, absolutely. Should at least have a basic understanding just to, you know, appreciate, you know, what they're using, for sure.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more on that, man. I mean, I mean, for me, aside from just talking about appreciating technology and really understanding just maybe the basics of a programming language.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that more in schools now too. I mean, even elementary schools, they're bringing more of these, like learn to code programs, like the Hour of Code and different things like that. They're pulling into schools, and I think if anything, I mean, aside from just learning the technology, especially when they're teaching in like young age, like in high school and even lower, I feel like when I learned how to program, it just helps you. It helps you in so many other aspects as far as thinking and like making logical decisions and
Totally.
you know, creating just forming just concepts and things in your head too. I mean, to me, it helps you just think, which I think is an obvious beneficial thing to have, especially with kids who are a younger age.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I totally agree with that. Like, I have even, you know, just probably noticed, you know, slightly myself thinking, you know, in a little bit more, I would say kind of like structure. You know, it's not like I learned to program and suddenly everything that I thought of was like, oh, like this is an if-else statement now, or
right,
you know,
not a robot.
yeah, you know, like, oh, but definitely, you know, in like math-based aspects, you know, because you know, the backbone of a calculator even is a you know, it's just a program.
Right.
And so, you know, the fact that programming and math is so closely related, and I think, you know, that translates, and even reading as well, because, you know, reading someone else's code is
it can be awful sometimes.
You know, oh yeah, yeah, it can be awful, but even in that process, you know, you kind of see the other ways that people do things that might you know, change your way of thinking. You know, you might have said, oh, you know, I would have done this way, but the way you did this, you know, it seems to be a, you know, much quicker or a much more effective way of doing that. So I think definitely even in reading, you know, you can extrapolate the benefits of programming to other skills. So yeah, definitely, you know, I think just in general, I mean, I think, you know, most people I know that program anyways are very smart people. I think in general, it's just, you know, it's a constant. It's not some sort of thing like when I go to work, you know, I'm not sitting there idly and like my mind's on autopilot. Like, you know, it's constantly engaging, and it's just a constant, you know, great brain workout, I suppose.
Right.
And yeah, it's definitely very good in that regard.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So, I mean, if someone's just getting into programming here, What would be your, it's hopefully not putting you on the spot too much, but what would be your one piece of advice you give someone just getting into development or design? What would you tell them to help them be successful?
I would say probably my number one piece of advice when someone is just getting into development or just getting into programming in general, I would say to not be discouraged. I think one of the big things when I was first starting out, when I was just creating these dinky little websites, is that especially I think in web development, you go online and you have a problem with something, and you research it, and there's people that will answer your questions that have this incredible understanding. You just can Google top like 100 web developers, and you will find incredible websites. And I at least know for myself, kind of when I was first starting out, I was like, my God, like, I'm just kind of getting into this in college. Like, these people have probably been doing this their whole lives. Like, how am I ever, going to be a good developer? I was like, for a little bit, I was like, maybe I'm too late to the game. Maybe this isn't worth it. It just seemed like there was so much still to learn, and that I had, just not enough time, or maybe not enough skills, and wasn't going to make it. And having the internet at your fingertips, in the couple keystrokes and the click of a button, you can find 100 people that are way better at anything that you do development wise. And that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. I mean, you want to think to yourself that you're good at what you do, and you want to be successful at what you do. You want to feel like you are contributing something that others aren't contributing. And being a web developer and having kind of that constant stream of others doing the same thing that you're doing, and maybe they're doing it a lot better, can be really daunting.
Right.
But I think really an awesome thing that I learned was just that after a while, I kind of started to just say, hey, you know what? There's nothing to be worried about. There's so many ways that you can take development, and so many skill sets that you can bring, that you don't have to be some sort of crazy JavaScript guru working at Google. As long as you are enjoying what you do and constantly seeking out new opportunities, you're going to be successful. And I think, for me, I've just, after a while, I kind of just said, you know what, like, forget it. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and be the best that I can be at developing. And, I've been happy ever since. I've continued to kind of push myself to learn new things and be a better developer. All the while continuing, to seeing myself improve. And I've ended up enjoying every second of my experience of being a web developer. For me, like I said, I would just say to anyone starting out to not get discouraged. Don't be worried that there are other people out there that are incredible and that you're never going to be good at what you do. There are tons and tons of openings in the web development field right now, and it's such a new, fresh field. There's so many people out there doing awesome things every day that you don't have to be some crazy, insane programmer to make a huge difference in the community. As long as you have an awesome idea and are able to implement it, then you're going to be successful at what you do. I know I've, read a few, kind of programming books, and one kind of quote that really struck out at me was, I was reading Eloquent JavaScript, and there was like a line from this book that was quoted. It was called like Zen programming or something. Okay. And there were like three guys, and they were talking, and one guy was like, oh, my best program is 10,000 lines of code. And And the other guy said, oh, well, my best program is 100,000 lines of code. And the third guy comes and he says, my best program is only 100 lines of code. And that really struck out at me, because it's like, you don't have to be some insane guy who's like on some coding binge for like a week straight and build something awesome. You can do something amazing in just 100 lines of code. So just don't be discouraged. Don't get worried that you're not going to be the best. Just keep on learning, continue to trust in your ability, and as long as you are enjoying what you're doing, at the end of the day, that should be all that matters.
Right. That's some great advice, Jay, too. It's like, I kind of see that as, it's almost part of the game of it. I mean, there's going to be times where for sure you're going to struggle. I mean, there's times where, I'll be sitting down on my computer and I'm trying to figure something out and it's just not working. But, what comes with experience too, you're going to figure it out. You're going to work it out. And that's the fun part of it too. It's like, I call it my jars. I keep filling up each jar. I'm like, okay, well, I've got this whole glass full. I'm past beginner stage. Now I'm filling up my intermediate glass. And if you just keep working towards that goal, one second at a time, breaking things down, you are going to be successful, man. That's some great advice right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were just saying there, that's definitely like another good point. I think with programming too, there are going to be a lot of times that you run into something where, you're just trying to get one little thing to work properly. And it's like you spend an hour debugging it and you're like, my God, what am I doing wrong? You feel like so stupid. And then you ended up you're like missing a semicolon or something.
Man.
Like that. Yeah. And I mean, that's just part of it all. Especially, I think on the web too, managing all these different environments, different browsers, like we were saying earlier, having multiple dependencies. I mean, that stuff is it's going to happen. But, the best thing, like I was saying, is just, don't be discouraged. Just keep at it. And like you were saying, just break it down. And, the feeling of finally like overcoming a bug like that is an awesome feeling. And, you learn a lot in the process, and hopefully next time, you don't make that mistake you made. So yeah, definitely, it's a struggle, but at the end of the day, it's for, it really helps you become a better programmer at the end of the day.
Definitely, man. Well, that's great advice. And, like, what you're saying, just sticking to it is the hardest thing. I mean, I'm very passionate about programming, and I try to get people involved in it as much as my friends as I can. None of them have actually stuck with it, but that's the thing I tell them, like, just it's okay. If you ask me questions, or just, you can. I use, when I first learned just basic HTML, I use a site called Treehouse, and those guys are great, man. I mean, they help me. I mean, that's where I learned JavaScript. So there's plenty of resources out there, and it's, there's, people like you that are like, you're talking about development. I mean, you know your stuff, and it's fun. People, I like talking about it. People like talking about it. So you're always going to find resources if you really do get stuck. So,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, all right, Jay. Well, like I said, I really appreciate your time being on the show today. Again, thank you so much for answering all the questions. And do you have a portfolio site or any kind of work? If anyone has any questions that people can go see your stuff you do. Do you have a GitHub account or anything?
Oh yeah. I'm like kind of in the process of redoing my personal website. I mean, you can go to it right now. It's just kind of like a placeholder page, just jlaiche.com. But my GitHub would probably be a better place to actually find like code examples and stuff like that. I just started like getting into trying to contribute to a few like open source projects. I just like submitted a pull request to Materialize, which is kind of like a material design version of Bootstrap. And just, and for anyone else, listening, that's just starting out, GitHub is a really awesome place to, see a lot of code examples, see a lot of really awesome projects that can help you out, or, just meet other, programmers and just kind of get exposed to the community. But yeah, my GitHub is, my name on GitHub is just LA1CH3. It's just my last name with like a 1 for the I and a 3 for the E. So if you just go to github.com/LA1CH3, Got a few repositories on there, a couple like forked projects. Definitely, follow me or send me a message, whatever. You can email me at j@jlaiche.com. Always, definitely love to help people out. And, I'm, still learning myself and, love to, meet other people that are involved in the same stuff as me and collaborate, knock stuff off of each other. So yeah, and thank you so much for having me on this show. I always love to talk web development, and just programming in general. I think, like you said, it's really like kind of growing over the past few years, and I'm glad to be a part of the community as a whole. Like I've loved every second of it, really. Like it's been a really awesome, like, nice community. Everyone I've met has been really nice, and we're all kind of in it for the same reasons, and we're all just love to constantly improve and think up new ideas. So it's just like a really, really cool kind of time to be a developer. So really stoked to see kind of where the future goes the next 10 or 15 years. But
yeah, I think it's crazy. Yeah,
so
well, that's gonna be awesome. I said things are gonna. I mean, I can't even imagine just how much technology is progressing anyway. What we're gonna be building in 15 years. It's just,
oh yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited, and I hope to be there. Developing that stuff still. Then I plan on it. I love programming. I especially on the web. I love all of it. And just love the whole community and just really everything about it. So definitely excited to see where it all goes, and just glad to be a part of it now.
All right, man. Well, great. Well, again, thank you so much for being on here, and like I said, hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
All right, Jay. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
Bye.